إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا الله ذكرا كثيرا وسبحوه بكرة وأصيلا. صدق الله العظيم. Alhamdulillah, all praise is indeed due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has gathered us here at the beginning of the semester on this Yom al-Jumu'ah. And while we commemorate today Salatul Jumu'ah and our prayers, our regular Friday prayers, today is also a very special day for us here in the United States, where it is a day in which we remember and reflect as a nation on what transpired 14 years ago. On September 11th in 2001, an event that would completely change the world, not just how we live here in the United States, but really impacted the world at large from what transpired thereafter. And thus we speak about the pre-9/11 world, we speak about the post-9/11 world. Many of you may have a memory of what transpired that day, but very few of you would know of what it was to live in a pre-9/11 world here in the United States. And many of our children have no recollection at all. They don't have anything as a reference point to compare, because the world did change. The world did change. What transpired on 9/11 with the killing and tragic death of nearly 3,000 citizens of this country, representing 96 different nations, was the most significant event in U.S. history in terms of the total loss of, in terms of the loss of life here on our land. And thus it sent us and sent the community and the nation into a shock and a series of responses, the impact of which we are continually seeing today in the media and the news. 9/11 was a time of reflection, but it was also a time in which wars were instigated, in which violence was further perpetuated. And it became a time of sadness, but also was a time of inspiration for sick-minded individuals around the world who sought to emulate what took place on that day. But if we look to really what was the motive and the drive behind 9/11, what it was in the human condition that spurred the actions of 9/11 by those proclaiming to be part of the faith of our beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it was the motivation of hate. It was the motivation of anger. It was the motivation of revenge for real or perceived grievances. Hate and anger. And what we see in the response to 9/11, oftentimes the lack of a measured response or a thought-out response, it is motivated by those same things of anger, of hate, of revenge. And we see what is the product of anger, hate, and revenge. Ugliness. Ugliness. Not beauty, but ugliness. Our reference point has always got to be our Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He is our reference point and He is our guide. He is our leader. He is the one who shows us how to live. He is the one who shows us how to behave as human beings.
He is the one who shows us how to deal with motivations of hate, anger, and revenge. If we look to the Prophet ﷺ at the point in which he began his call to the Quraysh, he went out and told them what? If I was to tell you there was an army behind me that has come to attack the city of Mecca, would you believe me? And without exception, the entire Quraysh and the leaders of Quraysh said, yes, we would. We know you as Al-Amin, we know you as the trustworthy, the truthful. You never lie. In spite of the fact that they knew, intellectually speaking, it would be highly doubtful that there could have been an army that nobody else knew about except the Prophet, except Muhammad as they knew him. That there would have been warning signs, that you would have seen the army coming for a long time, and it wouldn't be unknown. That how would it make sense that this one person would know that there was an army behind them that had gotten that close and no one else noticed? Yet because of his truthfulness, they said, we would accept. We will accept your word against our own intellect, our own better judgment of what would take place, or what could take place, because of his truthfulness. And then he followed up, I am a messenger of God, sent to guide you. And immediately the same people who testified to his truthfulness now said, look, he's lying, he's crazy. What happened? We speak about Islamophobia today is an irrational fear. Any phobia is an irrational fear. Not based upon any evidence, not based upon something you can point to intellectually, but irrational, illogical. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. What was the fear that the Quraysh had on the Prophet ﷺ? But an irrational fear. An irrational fear. Based upon what? Nothing. Their own tongues testified to the opposite. Irrational fears. When our Prophet ﷺ was at the lowest point of his life after years of calling his people to Allah and His Messenger, after years of calling his people to goodness, and falling upon deaf ears, and when he lost the support of his beloved wife, he lost the support of his uncle, Abu Talib. Where did he go? He went to another city to see if there were people who would respond to his message. People who maybe didn't have such an irrational fear. An irrational fear. So he went to the city of Ta'if. He went to the city of Ta'if, he met with the leaders there, and their response was the same, if not worse. They sent their children out to stone him. To stone him. A man has come to your city, and part of your tradition and your culture is to honor the guest, but they chose to stone him. Never mind dishonor him, but to add insult to injury, physically harm him. That he was bleeding and had to flee the city, and the narrations tell us that how many kilometers he had to walk and endure this parade of stoning. The lowest point of his life, by his own testimony, after losing, having such a loss of those who were close to him, after having a people who rejected him, his own people, and now to be stoned by little children, the lowest point of his life. And as he's able to leave the city with his foster child, Zayd, he leaves the city. And as he's sitting there, the angel Jibreel alayhi salam comes to him and he says, I have been instructed by the Lord of the worlds that He can give you permission that the angels of the mountain can bring upon the destruction of the city of Ta'if. Bring destruction to those who went above and beyond even their own norms of cultural and moral behaviors. to bring down the mountains upon them. And anyone who's been to Ta'if, one thing you notice even till this day is the mountains. The city is still amongst mountains that can't even be built upon, they're so large. That those mountains, to bring upon the city of Ta'if for what they had done. At the lowest point of his life, when people normally are fueled with anger, with rage, with hatred, and justifiably so in the case of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did he respond in a way of hatred? Did he respond in a way of anger? No. No. He told the angel Jibreel to hold back the angels of the mountain. That one day maybe these people, their children, will come to realize the error of their ways. And he prayed to Allah to forgive them for the error of their ways, for what they had done. At the lowest point of his life, he was a messenger of mercy. He was a messenger of forgiveness. When he had no worldly power whatsoever, at that point the future was bleak in a worldly sense. What happens? As we go through the seerah, we see him at the peak of his worldly power, transitioning from one stage to another. When he was in Medina, and he returns to the city of Mecca, returns to the same city that picked him out, the same city that was oppressive toward him, the same city that was expecting what? A response of rage, of revenge, of hatred. Because that was the reality of the discourse in which they lived. That was the reality of the world in which they lived. If we look to Jahiliyyah, Jahiliyyah is infused with revenge and hatred and anger and violence. That was the society in which they lived in. Things that many we read today and we can't even imagine. Unfortunately, we see maybe the reality of some of them still in today's world on the news. But several years ago, we couldn't even imagine that people could be living like that. In that state of Jahiliyyah, almost seemed fictionalized. That's the state they were living in. And when he comes at the peak of his worldly power, at his peak of his worldly power, when he has everything at his fingertips, when he has followers and whatever he says goes, he comes to that same city of Mecca. And the expectation was this response. Protecting their women, their children, their men. What will Muhammad do now? They knew what was coming. And when the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam gathered them together and he asked them, what do you think I will do with you? And they said, you are the Kareem, you are the noble one, the son of nobility. And yes, at one level, they were probably trying to seek some mercy, trying to flatter him. But on another level, they knew who he was, and that was a truthful statement of who he was. And he responded on that day, today you have been forgiven for what you did. Today you have been forgiven for what you did. This day is a day of forgiveness. At the height of his worldly power, when he would have been justified in his time, in his society, to take the revenge upon those people, which many of the Sahaba at that time were expecting themselves to take their revenge for what happened, to what happened to their families, the torture they suffered, the people who died who were dear to them, how much they suffered. But no. The cycle of violence had to stop. Had to stop. When he was called to Medina in the first place, why was he brought there? He was brought there to stop the cycle of violence. The cycle of violence between the Aus and the Khazraj. They couldn't find a way out of this cycle of revenge and retaliation. It was at a point at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, nobody even knew of the Aus and Khazraj, why they were fighting. It had gotten to that point. It had gotten to that point. It's very interesting, you talk to young people today who weren't even alive when 9/11 happened, and it's in their consciousness that they are aware of it. They're completely unaware of even what's going on in the world today. Why? It's been even forgotten. They don't even know what was 9/11. What was the impetus for all of this that we see today? The cycle of violence had to stop. Our Prophet ﷺ was described by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. This was the reality described by God Almighty. Not by Himself, not by others, but by God. In every action of His life, you see the testimony to the truth of the words of God Almighty. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Breaking the silence, breaking the cycles of violence, breaking the cycles of revenge, breaking the cycles of hatred. When our Prophet ﷺ instructed the man, don't get angry. When he asked him for advice, what should I do? He said, don't get angry. 3 times, don't get angry. What was he referring to? He knows it's a human emotion to get angry. It's a human emotion to get angry, and there are legitimate forms of anger. It's part of who you are as a human being. What was he advising him? Don't act upon that anger in a devilish way, in a satanic way. Don't act upon that anger in a devilish or satanic way. We see the world today, brothers and sisters, filled with people responding in anger in the most abominable of ways. Through this emotion of anger, through the emotion of hatred. Completely blinding them. And thus we see the most ugly of crimes. The ugliest of crimes. And some of them committed in the name of our Prophet ﷺ. People talk about conspiracies. Yes, there's a conspiracy out there. There is a conspiracy. It's a satanic conspiracy. It is a satanic conspiracy of seeking to drive people to engage their passions of hatred, to engage their passions of anger, their desires. What does Satan want more than anything else in this world is to take people to hellfire. That's what he wants. What did the Prophet ﷺ want? People to go to heaven. You tell me now, with the actions of these so-called Muslims in many parts of the world, and the actions they're committing, are people running to the deen, to salvation? Or are they running away from the deen? Are they running from that which is good and will take them to heaven? Or they want nothing to do with this faith and this prophet? Who is smiling now? Who is smiling? Iblis. People running away from their potential salvation because of the ugliness and the heinousness of what is being portrayed by many as Islam. And then those poor youth, some of them, most of them usually emotionally or psychologically disturbed, who are attracted or have some sort of illness, mental illness oftentimes, or they feel completely alienated from their society, get attracted. What do? Youth fleeing there, especially from Europe and other parts, with the promise of all of these beautiful things. And the first thing they're doing is told what? Strap on a bomb and blow yourself up. Where is he going? Hellfire. What does Satan do? People who may be motivated even by sincerity are being taken to hell in the name of the Prophet ﷺ. The sickness. The sickness. We have people today, obviously, in our society, most of which, and we have to recognize this, most of the Islamophobia that we are experiencing here in the United States, which is on the rise. Just yesterday, there was another Sikh man who was just attacked and being brutally almost killed because he was thought to be a Muslim. This rising tide of Islamophobia, and echoed by many in seats of power or media outlets, But most of the people are what? Are victims of the same propaganda. They're victims of the propaganda. They don't know. And we have to honestly ask ourselves, if all we had as an exposure to Islam is what we see on TV, would we want anything to do with that faith? Is that the prophet that we know? Is that the prophet that somebody should be following? We wouldn't. And the reality is, people are not investigating. They take like we do. We just receive. We don't question things, we just receive. We just happen to know something else about the faith of Islam, so that part we question. That part we can challenge. But how many news or other things we hear about and we just accept wholesale? Because somebody said it, with no investigation. Yet we expect others who behave in the same way to investigate on their own. Can we expect them to be different if they don't know? Yes, there are those who have their agendas. Yes, there are those who have their evil intentions. But most people who are expressing their frustration, their anger toward Muslims are just like feeding into their anger and their hatred based on ignorance. Based on ignorance. At ISNA this past weekend, they just honored a young man from Bangladesh who was shot after 9/11 in the face. And he happened to live by a white supremacist in Texas. And the perpetrator of the crime, he was sentenced to death. And this simple Bangladeshi man started a campaign after his return from Hajj, where he felt inspired by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his message of forgiveness and mercy, started a campaign to get him off death row and not to be executed. Because he realized as he looked to the man's life who shot him in the face, that he was born in a household of hatred, that he was born in a household of alcohol, a broken home, who had no job, who had no future, who wasn't properly even educated in reading and writing, and was just fed from when he was a young kid white supremacist ideas. And thus when he lashed out at him, he realized it was due to this whole history that he had of hatred. But this young Muslim brother started a campaign inspired by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being of forgiveness and mercy, and started a campaign to try to have him released from death row. Going all the way to the Supreme Court, going to the European Union, getting nations even trying to petition that they take him off death row. Finally ending up in the office of Governor Perry, who's running out for president, who refused to commute his sentence, and he was executed. He was executed. But before he died, that man came to a realization, and you should watch the interviews, they're on YouTube. Tears in his eyes, as he spoke about the hatred he was born into, the hatred that he lived, and the biggest regret of his life is engaging and acting out upon hatred. And he was taught this by this Muslim man that he tried to kill. And his last words before he died was, "Don't embrace the hatred. Don't embrace the hatred." Brothers and sisters, people are born into societies, they're born into mindsets, they're fed things which are very problematic oftentimes. And whether it's here or other parts of the world, we have to be people of understanding of where people are coming from, but also wanting to educate others. Don't expect others to know who we are, who our prophet is. It is up to us to do so. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us, that we may be forgiven. With Allah yaghfir lakum dhunubakum.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala an-nabi ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما باركت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد.
Brothers and sisters, the events on 9/11 have sparked a series of other events, and we're seeing now the continuation of violence, the continuation of wars being fought, the continuation of people being killed through drone strikes, the continuation of people being killed through beheadings and what have you. This cycle of violence based upon retaliation, revenge, and hatred. You know, that picture just recently that touched all of our hearts in the world over, of the little boy who was washed up on the shores of Turkey on the beach. We say that a picture speaks 1,000 words. Indeed it does. Because if you want to understand where the cycle of violence, where the cycle of hatred and anger lead, that sea of torment leads to it being spit out, the innocent being spit out. That the reality is that those who have suffered on 9/11 day and those who continue to suffer the world over are those innocent victims, the overwhelming majority. And they are the victims of decisions being made in boardrooms or caves around the world. That's the reality. That is the reality of hatred. That is the reality of anger. It leads to ugliness in the world. Our prophet and all prophets, going back to Adam, sought to bring beauty into this world. Sought to bring beauty into this world. The Prophet ﷺ, he prayed for the mountains to be kept back and not to be coming crashing down, while we have people who actually what? Brought down mountains of steel, mountains of glass upon entire people. For what? People who just went that morning to go to work. For what? Look how ugly the world has become. Look how ugly throughout history we see that those who perpetrate violence in the name of hatred and anger, look how ugly it is. Look how ugly it is. We have to be people of beauty. We have to be people that follow that prophetic example. And that requires first and foremost of us that we are not prisoners of discourses and things taking place at other parts of the world. We are constantly here in the United States being caught oftentimes between people trying to pull our strings from overseas, whether they're sheikhs or leaders or what have you, based upon what's going on in their particular time in their country. And then we have here people who want us pulling our strings and trying to define us as not belonging here in the United States or part of that camp or this camp. We have to be courageous enough and bold enough to define ourselves of who we are, where we are living, and what we are here to do. We shall not be defined by those overseas, and we shall not be defined by those in our country. We define ourselves as Muslims here living in the United States upon the prophetic example. So much hate, so much violence, even domestically we're seeing it, what's transpiring. We have to become those voices of peace, those voices of love, those voices of compassion. Not because it's politically correct, because this was the way of our Messenger ﷺ. Our interest is in winning hearts, not in winning wars. Our interest is in helping people, not destroying them. This was the Messenger. Otherwise, he could have wiped out Quraysh from day one. But the minute they were wiped out, where were they going? To hell. How many times the Prophet ﷺ had the chance to have people killed and refrained from doing so? Why? And those same people became Muslim later. Because he had a vision of the future. He had a vision of where he wanted people to be. Not in hell. Not to be living in hell in this world or the next. Brothers and sisters, we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst those who are compassionate. To remove from our hearts hatred, anger, and fill our hearts with love and mercy, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask that you bless us in this coming semester, that we have a semester in which we not only succeed in our academic pursuits, but that we spiritually grow and draw nearer to you, and that we contribute to the society at large and leave a mark of a lasting impression, a positive contribution to our university and college. We ask you, Ya Allah, that all of those who are suffering in the world, to alleviate their suffering, to alleviate their pain, Ya Allah, to show mercy and have mercy upon them, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask that our leaders, our imams, our sheikhs, that you guide clarity of heart and the clarity of mind in making decisions for our communities, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask that you make us to be people and tools of compassion, Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, to make us to be vehicles of compassion, to make us to be a source in which people are inspired and come to know our beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and to not be an obstacle to people's path of discovering who indeed our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was. Ya Allah, we ask that you bless us on this day of Jumu'ah and this day of blessing. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون أقيموا الصلاة